Hello and welcome to #Africa, where we bring you the latest from the African continent. I'm Ropiwa Madzena. Let's kick off with some of this week's top stories. A man accused of being a mastermind of a failed regional coup in Ethiopia has been shot dead. General Asami Nutsige is suspected of trying to seize control of the northern Amara region. The failed coup led to the death of 5 people, including the National Army's Chief of Staff and Amara's state president. A memorial for the slain military chief was held on Tuesday. Foreign currencies are no longer acceptable in Zimbabwe. Finance Minister Mthuli Ncube says Zimbabwe's interim currency, the RTGS dollar, is the only one that is now acceptable. This effectively sidelines the multiple currency regime that Zimbabwe has been using alongside bond notes. The minister has gazetted the official sidelining of the rand, the Botswana pula, the US dollar and other currencies as a legal tender. Foreign currency accounts will continue in the foreign currencies with which they were opened and in which they are operated. 5 critically endangered eastern black rhinos have arrived from the Czech Republic to begin a new life in Rwanda's Akagera National Park. The rhinos, 2 males and 3 females, are between 2 and 9 years old. They were relocated to help with conservation efforts in what is the largest ever transportation of rhinos from Europe to Africa. About 1,000 eastern black rhinos remain in Africa, living under threat from poaching. Business experts say Africa's 54 countries should be top of list for any entrepreneur on the continent when considering to expand into foreign markets. So what should South African companies look out for when venturing into the rest of the continent? To discuss this, we're joined by J.M. Busher Investment Group's Managing Director, Joseph Busher. Thank you so much for your time. I think when we talk about companies venturing into the rest of the continent, some of the big stories we obviously think of the likes of MTN, and I want us to focus on that. That venturing out into the African continent, how exactly should a South African company be approaching it?
Well, Africa is a greenfield. I think it's in a greenfield in particular in terms of technology and in terms of the fourth industrial revolution people are talking about, in terms of agriculture, and in terms of banking. If you look in terms of the entire business sector, whether it's banking, farming, renewable energy, technology, I think Africa offers lots of opportunities. But I think one of the key examples we need to be able to do is when we go and do business in Africa, or when we set up business in Africa, what do we put in place together? So the main issue for me is really governance, and we're looking at MTN as an example of first a successful business, I think in terms of reach and the markets they've gone into, but also the risk it carries in terms of what has happened to MTN as they explored into the foreign markets.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about the risks that are contained when going into foreign markets. We've seen over the last few years they've been forced to pay fine after fine for various violations by Nigerian authorities, and really just a way in which to mitigate some of those challenges. We've seen them create a board, an advisory board that's going to be headed by former President Thabo Mbeki. And I mean, is this the direction companies should be taking when it comes to dealing with issues within that region?
I think that's where the risk comes from my point of view, because what you don't want to do is business and politics to collude. Whenever there's business and politics colluding, it does not serve the interests, first, of the citizens, and secondly, of the investors. So if you look in terms of the history of MTN, other than the mention of Nigeria, they are in Iran, and they also had allegations of malpractice in terms of how they obtained their license in Iran. I think there was allegations that they got their license fraudulently, and Taxel of Turkey has basically been making those allegations. Now, MTN, if you look in terms of how they tried to grow the business, certainly they had lots of political influence. Our current president, President Ramaphosa, was the chairman of MTN. When the fines were first instituted in Nigeria, which was really for me a governance and risk issue and a compliance issue, because they were supposed to disconnect SIM cards, which they didn't do, and then got fined. And secondly, then they were fined again in terms of management fees and dividends that were paid to transferred to SA about $8 billion. So for me, it becomes a problem when our former heads of states starts going into business. I believe personally, President Mbeki, former President Mbeki, has got no business to be in MTN's business. He took oath, as far as I'm concerned, to save South Africa and to save Africa. Now, he's got lots of unfinished business, to do. We've got peace issues like in Sudan, where he took a very active role, to try and make sure that there was peace in Sudan, hence with the split of the country into two. He started NEPAD with Obasanjo, the president of Nigeria, and we need to see whether NEPAD is working or not. So our view is that when you find politicians getting into business after serving, being a public servant, there's always political meddling and they're looking for political influence. And I think that's a bad precedent, because what you're going to find that all ministers, once they leave their civil servants, they want to go into the private sector. Yet, I think, the president is paid for the rest of his life by the taxpayers' money. And my view is then they must focus on policy direction in their countries. I mean, the former president of Ghana is part of that. Former governor at Nigeria, central bank is part of that, and other high-profile people. And also our former deputy minister Jonas is also part of that. So I'm saying this is really a bad precedent we are finding. And we have seen that in South Africa, where lots of ministers, who served in Mandela, Mbeki era, they've gone into business. Jabu Moloketi, his wife, and a couple of other ministers, where I think, for me, is a bad precedent for the future.
What about the argument then, very briefly, Mr. Busha, that companies need the politicians so that they're able to navigate within a particular market? Without that political influence, some might argue MTN would not survive.
Well, you really don't need political influence. You need governance. You need the right governance. But also, I believe that they need to be able to give young people an opportunity to sit on those boards. We're talking about technology here, and you know that older people do not even know how to use their cell phones, just like me. I can't really compete with younger people, whether on WhatsApp or social media. So I think for me, the whole issue is that you certainly don't want to set it as a precedent. Chisano, former president of Mozambique, is also sitting on Exaro and other boards. And I just think, as Africa, we need to make sure that when we promise and commit, we continue to do that. What you need to do as a business is certainly just abide by the rules of the country, stick to legislation, and your business will prosper.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for those insights. I've been speaking there to JM Busha Investment Group Managing Director Joseph Busha. When we return, one man's trash is another man's treasure. And later, we take a culinary trip to another African country. More on that in just a moment. Stay with #Africa.